Billionaire CEO flies economy. Karen insults him for 6 hours, then sees him at her job interview. The alarm on Jonathan Hayes' phone buzzed at 4:30 in the morning, pulling him from a restless sleep in his San Francisco penthouse. At 54 years old, Jonathan had learned to function on minimal rest, a skill honed over 3 decades of building sterling technologies, from a garage startup into a global software empire worth $42 billion. But today's early wake-up call wasn't for an emergency board meeting or a crisis management session. Today, he was flying to New York for what his executive team had codenamed Operation Insight. For the past year, Sterling Technologies had been bleeding talent, particularly among mid-level employees and customer service teams. Exit interviews revealed a troubling pattern. People felt disconnected from leadership, convinced that executives had no understanding of the daily challenges faced by regular employees or customers. The company culture, once praised as innovative and inclusive, had become bureaucratic and impersonal. Jonathan's solution was radical and had been met with resistance from his executive team. He would spend the next month working undercover in various entry-level positions across the company, experiencing firsthand what his employees dealt with daily. He would start with the customer service center in Manhattan, posing as a new hire named John Hayes, armed with a fabricated resume that showed years of call center experience. But first, he had to get to New York. And in keeping with his undercover mission, he had booked himself a seat in economy class on the 6 a.m. flight. His chief of staff, Margaret Chen, had been horrified. "Jonathan, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company," she had protested. "You can't fly economy. What if someone recognizes you?" "That's exactly the point," Margaret, Jonathan had replied. "I need to experience what regular employees experience. Our salespeople fly economy. Our customer service reps take red-eye flights. If I'm going to understand their world, I need to live in it, at least temporarily." Now dressed in plain khaki pants, a nondescript polo shirt, and carrying a simple backpack instead of his usual leather briefcase, Jonathan looked nothing like the polished executive whose face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He had deliberately skipped his usual morning shave, letting a day's worth of stubble shadow his face. His reading glasses were drugstore readers, not the designer frames he typically wore. Everything about his appearance was calculated to make him forgettable, ordinary, invisible. The Uber ride to San Francisco International Airport took 35 minutes in the pre-dawn darkness. Jonathan used the time to review his cover story one more time. John Hayes, 45 years old, worked various call center jobs over the past 15 years. Recently relocated to New York. No family, no remarkable history. Just another person trying to make a living in an expensive world. The terminal was surprisingly crowded for the early hour, filled with business travelers clutching coffee cups and bleary-eyed tourists beginning their vacations. Jonathan joined the security line, patiently shuffling forward with everyone else. No TSA pre-check for this trip. No priority boarding. Just the regular experience that millions of Americans had every day. Gate 37 was at the far end of the terminal, requiring a 15-minute walk. Jonathan's seat assignment was 32B, a middle seat in the back of the aircraft. Again, Margaret had been appalled. "You'll be miserable," she had warned. 6 hours in a middle seat will leave you exhausted for your first day of work." Then I'll understand exactly how our traveling employees feel, Jonathan had said. He bought a coffee and a breakfast sandwich from a terminal cafe, waiting in line behind a harried mother with two small children and a businessman on his phone arguing loudly about quarterly projections. The sandwich was mediocre and overpriced, the coffee decent, but not great. Jonathan made mental notes. Employee travel policy should include meal stipends that actually cover airport food costs. Current allowance is probably insufficient. Boarding began at 5:30. Jonathan waited patiently as families and passengers needing assistance boarded first, followed by first class and elite status members. When his group was finally called, he joined the crowd shuffling down the jetway, rolling suitcases, banging against walls, children whining adults, checking phones one last time before airplane mode. The economy cabin was a study in cramped efficiency. Seats packed together with minimal legroom, overhead bins already full. The air stuffy with the smell of recycling, and too many people in too small a space. Jonathan located row 32 and saw that both the window and aisle seats were already occupied. The window seat held an elderly man who appeared to be asleep, his head tilted against the wall. The aisle seat was occupied by a woman in her mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, designer gym clothes that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and an expression of profound irritation as she stared at her phone. "Excuse me," Jonathan said politely. "I'm in the middle seat." The woman looked up, her eyes traveling from his scuffed sneakers up to his stubbled face, clearly cataloging and dismissing him in one glance. With exaggerated annoyance, she stood and stepped into the aisle, making no effort to hide her displeasure. "Middle seat," she muttered to herself as Jonathan squeezed past. "Of course." Jonathan settled into the narrow space, immediately aware of how little room there was. At 6 feet tall, his knees pressed against the seat in front of him. The armrests were ambiguous territory, and he could tell the woman next to him had already claimed the one between them, her elbow firmly planted. The woman sat back down, her movements sharp and irritated. She pulled out her phone again and began typing furiously, her thumbs stabbing at the screen. Jonathan caught a glimpse of what appeared to be an email, stuck in economy with absolute peasants. "If this interview doesn't result in a VP position, I'm going to lose my mind." So she was flying to New York for a job interview. Jonathan filed that information away and pulled out his own phone, opening the e-book. He had been reading a thriller about corporate espionage that struck him as slightly ironic given his current situation. The flight attendants came through checking seatbelts and stowing bags. The woman next to Jonathan flagged one down. "Excuse me, is there any chance of moving to a different seat? Maybe one with more space," the flight attendant. A tired-looking man in his 40s checked his tablet. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're completely full today. Every seat is taken." "You're telling me there's not a single empty seat on this entire plane?" The woman's voice rose with incredulity. "That's correct. It's a full flight." "What about first class? I'll pay to upgrade." "First class is also full, ma'am. I apologize." The woman huffed and returned to her phone, her irritation radiating like heat. Jonathan said nothing, trying to make himself as small as possible in the limited space, a skill he had not needed to employ in many years. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began taxiing, the woman made a phone call, speaking loudly enough that half the cabin could hear. "Tricia, yeah, it's me. You won't believe this flight. I'm stuck in economy." "Yes, economy. Can you believe it? In a middle seat between some old man who's already asleep and some scruffy-looking guy who probably hasn't showered in days." Jonathan kept his eyes on his e-book, his face neutral. He had been the CEO long enough to have developed a thick skin, but there was something particularly grating about being insulted by someone who didn't know she was sitting next to the person who could change her entire career trajectory with a single phone call. The interview is at 2, the woman continued. Sterling Technologies VP of Customer Experience. It's perfect for me, Tricia. I've been in customer success at TechFlow for 5 years. I know how to manage teams, optimize processes, maximize efficiency. This is my big break. Jonathan's interest sharpened. She was interviewing for a position at his company, not just any position, but VP of Customer Experience, a critical role they had been trying to fill for 3 months. The search committee had narrowed it down to 5 candidates, and Jonathan had planned to sit in on the final interviews at the end of the week. I know, the woman was saying. The salary is $300,000 plus bonuses, and the benefits are supposed to be amazing. Plus, it's Sterling Technologies. That's a name that opens doors. After a few years there, I could go anywhere. She paused, listening. What? No, I'm not worried about the interview. I've got this. My resume is perfect. My references are stellar, and I know exactly what they're looking for. Someone who can transform their customer experience, cut costs, streamline operations. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Another pause. Culture fit. Please. I can play the culture game. I'll smile, talk about collaboration and innovation, say all the right things. Once I'm in the door and have proven my value, they'll let me run things my way. That's how it works. Jonathan made a mental note. Review our interview process for VP candidates. Are we adequately assessing for genuine cultural alignment versus performance? The woman ended her call just as the flight attendants began the safety demonstration. She didn't pay attention, instead pulling out a tablet and opening what appeared to be a presentation. Jonathan glanced over. He couldn't help himself and saw slides titled Customer Experience Transformation, a Cost Reduction Strategy. The presentation was full of buzzwords and corporate jargon. Optimize throughput, reduce average handle time, implement AI-driven responses to minimize human interaction, restructure teams to maximize productivity. What it didn't include, Jonathan noticed, was anything about actually improving the customer experience. It was all about efficiency and cost-cutting. The aircraft took off, climbing steeply into the early morning sky over San Francisco Bay. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and immediately the woman reclined her seat, despite the cramped quarters and the person behind her who let out an audible groan. Finally, she said to no one in particular, 6 hours of this is going to be torture. The flight attendants came through with the beverage service. When they reached row 32, the woman ordered a tomato juice with specific instructions. No ice, extra lime, and can you bring me the whole can, not just a cup? Of course, the flight attendant said with practiced patience. When it was Jonathan's turn, he simply asked for water. Just water is fine, thank you. The woman glanced at him with thinly veiled contempt. Let me guess, you're one of those people who doesn't believe in paying for drinks. Jonathan looked at her directly for the first time. I'm sorry. Airlines charge for everything now. Drinks, snacks, bags. People who fly economy and complain about it are so tiresome. If you want free drinks, fly first class. I first. I didn't complain, Jonathan said mildly. I just asked for water. Whatever. The woman returned to her tablet, but she continued muttering. 6 hours next to cheapskates and people who can't afford basic hygiene. This is exactly why I don't fly economy. The elderly man by the window stirred and woke up. Excuse me, he said politely. I need to use the restroom. The woman sighed heavily, as if this was an enormous imposition, but she stood and moved into the aisle. The elderly man shuffled out, moving slowly, with the careful movements of someone dealing with arthritis or age. As he made his way down the aisle, the woman turned to Jonathan. Can you believe some people, she said, as if they were conspirators, flying when they can barely walk? They should have special flights for old people and families with kids. The rest of us shouldn't have to deal with it. Jonathan felt his jaw tighten. That man has as much right to fly as anyone else. I didn't say he doesn't have the right, the woman said defensively. I'm just saying it's inconsiderate. Some of us have important things to do, important places to be. We shouldn't be slowed down by people who can't keep up. Maybe your important things aren't more important than his important things, Jonathan suggested. The woman looked at him with surprise, as if the idea that he might disagree with her had never occurred to her. You don't even know what I do. You're right, I don't. Just like you don't know anything about that man or his life or why he's traveling. Whatever, the woman said again, her default response when challenged. You wouldn't understand. You probably work some dead-end job flying economy because you can't afford better. Some of us are trying to move up in the world. Jonathan returned to his e-book without responding. He had learned long ago that arguing with people who had already decided they were superior was a waste of energy. Better to observe, to learn to see what their behavior revealed about their character. The flight continued. The woman worked on her presentation, occasionally taking calls. When the plane's Wi-Fi was strong enough, always speaking loudly, always making sure everyone around her knew she was important, that she had big meetings, that she was destined for great things. She complained about the snack service, pretzels, that's it, and about the temperature. Why is it so cold? And about the child crying 3 rows back. Can't they control that kid? And about the turbulence. This is ridiculous. I'm going to complain to the airline. Through it all, Jonathan remained quiet, observing. This woman who was interviewing to lead Sterling Technologies' customer experience division demonstrated zero empathy, zero patience, zero understanding of what regular customers experienced. She viewed service workers as servants, fellow passengers as obstacles, and anyone she perceived as beneath her as fundamentally less worthy of consideration. About 4 hours into the flight, after the woman had exhausted her complaints about everything from the legroom to the air quality to the flight attendant's competence, she turned to Jonathan with a calculating look. So what do you do? She asked, though her tone suggested she didn't actually care and was just making conversation to pass the time. I work in technology, Jonathan said, keeping his answer vague. Oh yeah. What company? Small startup. You wouldn't have heard of it. Try me. I know the tech industry really well. It's very small, Jonathan repeated. We do consulting work mostly. The woman lost interest immediately. Consulting. So basically you're between real jobs. That's tough. Have you thought about going back to school, getting an MBA? That's what separates the leaders from the followers in tech. I've thought about it, Jonathan said non-committally. You should do it. I mean, if you want to amount to anything. I have an MBA from Stanford. Best investment I ever made. Opens doors you wouldn't believe. Jonathan, who had founded Sterling Technologies while he was still in college and who had been offered honorary doctorates from 3 universities, simply nodded. That sounds valuable. It is. That's why I'm flying to New York for this interview. VP position at Sterling Technologies. Have you heard of them? I have, Jonathan said. They're a big company. Huge, the woman corrected. $42 billion valuation. And they want me to come transform their customer experience. My current company, TechFlow, has been begging me to stay, but Sterling is the big leagues. I'd be stupid to pass it up. What makes you qualified for the position? Jonathan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. 5 years managing customer success at TechFlow, the woman said proudly. I increased our efficiency by 32% and reduced costs by 18%. I know how to run a tight ship, how to maximize productivity, how to eliminate waste. What about actual customer satisfaction? Jonathan asked. Did that improve? The woman waved her hand dismissively. Customer satisfaction scores are subjective. What matters is efficiency and profitability. Happy customers are nice, but profitable customers are better. What if you could have both? Jonathan suggested. In theory, sure, but in practice, you have to make choices. And I choose results over feelings every time. That's what makes me an effective leader. Jonathan thought about Sterling Technologies' current customer satisfaction scores, which had been declining for the past 2 years. He thought about the employee feedback that leadership was disconnected from the actual experience of customers and workers. He thought about this woman so confident in her philosophy of efficiency over empathy, potentially taking charge of one of the most customer-facing divisions in his company, over his dead body. Sounds like you have strong opinions, Jonathan said carefully. I do, and that's what Sterling needs. Someone who's not afraid to make tough decisions, to prioritize what matters, to cut through the corporate BS and get results. Have you met anyone from Sterling, talked to current employees about what it's like to work there? I've done my research, the woman said. I know their revenue, their market position, their competitors. That's what matters. What about their culture, their values? The woman laughed. Culture and values are just marketing. What really matters is performance. Trust me. I've been in corporate America long enough to know how it actually works. Companies say they care about people and values and all that feel-good stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about the bottom line. Jonathan made another mental note. Ensure our values are actually embedded in our operations, not just our marketing materials. This woman's cynicism suggests we're not walking our talk. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting suddenly. The woman grabbed the armrests, her face going pale. Oh my God, are we going to crash? It's just turbulence, Jonathan said calmly. It happens on most flights. This is exactly what I'm talking about, the woman said, fear making her voice sharp. Economy class is dangerous. First class has better safety, better everything. That's not actually true, Jonathan said. The safety is the same throughout the aircraft. Whatever. You wouldn't understand. You're used to this. She said this with such contempt that several nearby passengers turned to look. The flight attendant who had served them earlier appeared in the aisle. Ma'am, I need to ask you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing other passengers. I'll keep my voice at whatever level I want, the woman snapped. I paid for this ticket just like everyone else. Ma'am, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to ask the captain to make a decision about your continued behavior. The threat of being reported to the captain seemed to penetrate. The woman's face flushed, but she nodded curtly and returned to her tablet, her movements jerky with barely contained anger. Jonathan felt sympathy for the flight attendant, who was just trying to do his job, and for the other passengers who had been subjected to 6 hours of this woman's complaints and commentary. He also felt a growing sense of certainty about the interview that awaited this woman in New York. The final 2 hours of the flight passed in relative silence. The woman dozed fitfully, her presentation still open on her tablet. Jonathan used the time to think about his company, about the disconnect between leadership and employees, about how someone like this woman could make it through multiple interview rounds for a senior position. As the plane began its descent into JFK, the woman woke up and immediately began freshening her makeup, transforming herself from the complaining passenger into a polished professional. It was remarkable how quickly she could shift personas, Jonathan thought. Which version was real, or were they both performances? The landing was smooth and passengers began the familiar scramble to gather belongings and exit as quickly as possible. The woman was up immediately, pulling her bag from the overhead bin and positioning herself in the aisle, clearly intending to be among the first off the plane. "Excuse me," the elderly man by the window said. "Could I get out?" The woman rolled her eyes, but stepped back slightly. The man moved slowly, carefully, and the woman's impatience was visible in every line of her body. As they filed off the aircraft, Jonathan hung back, allowing the rush of passengers to flow past him. He thanked the flight crew, who looked exhausted from dealing with a difficult passenger load. In the jetway, he pulled out his phone and called Margaret. "Margaret, it's Jonathan. I need you to do something for me." "Of course." "How was the flight?" "Educational." "Listen, we have a candidate interviewing today for VP of Customer Experience. I need you to find out her name and interview time." "Jonathan, you're not supposed to be anywhere near the office during your undercover operation," Margaret reminded him. "That was the whole point." "I know, but I need to be at this particular interview. Trust me." Margaret sighed, but agreed. 15 minutes later, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text. Vanessa Morrison. "Interview at 2 p.m. with the hiring committee. Conference room B." Vanessa Morrison. Now he had a name to go with the face. Jonathan checked his watch. It was just past noon. He had 2 hours to get to Manhattan, change into appropriate clothing, and make it to his own office in time for an interview he wasn't supposed to attend. He caught a cab to his Manhattan apartment, a place he kept for exactly these occasions. It was much smaller than his San Francisco penthouse, but it was comfortable, and most importantly, it had a wardrobe of his usual business attire. 45 minutes later, Jonathan Hayes looked like himself again. Freshly shaved, dressed in a tailored navy suit, designer glasses instead of drugstore readers, carrying his familiar leather portfolio. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw the CEO of Sterling Technologies, not the scruffy guy from seat 32B. He arrived at Sterling's New York offices at 1:45, slipping in through the executive entrance to avoid being seen by too many people. Margaret met him in his private office, which he almost never used since his main base was in San Francisco. "Jonathan, what's going on?" she asked. "You're supposed to be starting at the customer service center undercover." "I will," Jonathan assured her, "tomorrow. But today I need to be at this interview. Where's the hiring committee?" "They're gathering in conference room B now, But Jonathan, they're not expecting you. Your presence will throw off the entire process. Good, Jonathan said. That's exactly what needs to happen. At 2 p.m. precisely, Jonathan walked into conference room B. The hiring committee, 5 people, including the head of HR and the interim head of customer experience, looked up in shock. Jonathan, the head of HR, a competent woman named Sarah Winters, stood up quickly. We weren't expecting you. I thought you were traveling. Change of plans? Jonathan said, taking a seat at the head of the table. I decided I wanted to sit in on this particular interview. I hope that's not a problem. Of course not, Sarah said, though her expression suggested she was frantically trying to figure out what this meant. The candidate should be here any moment. Her name is Vanessa Morrison, currently at TechFlow. Very impressive resume. I'm sure, Jonathan said neutrally. 2 minutes later, there was a knock on the conference room door, and Vanessa Morrison entered. She had transformed completely from the woman on the plane. Her hair was styled professionally, her makeup perfect, her suit expensive and well-tailored. She carried herself with confidence and poise, her smile warm and engaging. Good afternoon, she said, extending her hand to shake with each committee member. I'm Vanessa Morrison, and I'm so excited to be here. She made her way around the table, shaking hands and making eye contact with each person, her demeanor professional and enthusiastic. When she reached Jonathan at the head of the table, she extended her hand without any sign of recognition. Vanessa Morrison, she said with her practiced smile. And you are Jonathan Hayes, he said, watching her face carefully. CEO of Sterling Technologies. The smile froze. The color drained from her face. Her hand still extended began to tremble visibly. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. You, she whispered. You're from the plane. Seat 32B, Jonathan confirmed. Middle seat economy class, right next to you for 6 hours. The committee members looked confused, glancing between Jonathan and Vanessa with growing concern. Miss Morrison, Jonathan continued, his voice calm but cold. Please have a seat. I think we have a lot to discuss. Vanessa sank into the chair, her polished demeanor cracking. Her hands were shaking as she tried to open her portfolio. Let me save you the trouble of your presentation, Jonathan said. I saw it on the plane. Very focused on efficiency and cost cutting, not so much on actual customer experience. Mr. Hayes, I can explain, Vanessa started. Can you explain calling me scruffy and suggesting I probably hadn't showered in days? Can you explain your contempt for the elderly gentleman who needed to use the restroom? Can you explain your philosophy that customer satisfaction is subjective and that profitability matters more than people? The committee members were staring now fully, understanding that something significant had happened. I was tired, Vanessa said weakly. You didn't mean to reveal who you really are, Jonathan interrupted. Ms. Morrison, I spent 6 hours listening to you complain about everything and everyone around you. I heard you treat service workers with contempt. I watched you be rude to fellow passengers. I listened to you explain how you plan to prioritize efficiency over empathy, how you view corporate values as just marketing, how you think strong leadership means making tough decisions without regard for feelings. That's not, Vanessa couldn't seem to form a coherent sentence. The problem isn't that you had a bad day, Jonathan said. The problem is that everything you said and did on that flight revealed your actual values, your actual character, your actual approach to people. And those values, that character, that approach, they're the opposite of what Sterling Technologies stands for. He turned to the committee. We've been trying to figure out why our customer satisfaction scores are declining. Why employees feel disconnected from leadership. Why our culture feels impersonal and bureaucratic. It's because we've been hiring and promoting people who prioritize metrics over humanity, who view people as resources to be optimized rather than as individuals to be valued. Jonathan looked back at Vanessa. Ms. Morrison, I appreciate you taking the time to interview with us, but Sterling Technologies is not the right fit for you. We're looking for someone who genuinely believes that treating people well, employees and customers, is not just good ethics, but good business. Someone who understands that efficiency without empathy creates a sterile, transactional experience that drives people away. Please, Vanessa said, tears forming in her eyes now. I need this job. I've told everyone I'm getting it. I've already given notice at my current company. This was supposed to be my big break. I'm sorry, Jonathan said, and he meant it. Not sorry enough to change his decision, but sorry that she had apparently built her entire professional approach on such a flawed foundation. But your approach to leadership is fundamentally incompatible with our values, and today's interview has made that crystal clear. Vanessa sat frozen for a moment, then gathered her portfolio with shaking hands. This is because I didn't recognize you on the plane. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently, Jonathan finished. Yes, exactly. That's the whole problem, Ms. Morrison. You treat people differently based on who you think they are, what you think they're worth. That's not leadership. That's hierarchy, enforced through contempt. Vanessa stood up, her face blotchy with humiliation and anger. You set me up. You deliberately didn't tell me who you were. I didn't set you up, Jonathan corrected. I was exactly who I appeared to be, another passenger on a plane. You chose to treat me with contempt based on nothing more than my appearance and my seat assignment. Those were your choices, Ms. Morrison, not mine. Vanessa walked to the door, then paused and turned back. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't fit your precious culture. But at least I'm honest about prioritizing results. At least I don't pretend that being nice is the same as being effective. You're wrong about that, Jonathan said quietly. Being nice, or more accurately, treating people with dignity and respect, is incredibly effective. It builds loyalty, encourages innovation, creates environments where people want to do their best work. Your approach creates fear and resentment, and in the long run, that's not just unethical, it's unprofitable. Vanessa left without another word, the door closing firmly behind her. The committee sat in stunned silence. Finally, Sarah spoke. Jonathan, what just happened? Jonathan told them about the flight, about the 6 hours of observation, about everything he had heard and seen. The committee members listened with growing understanding. She made it through 4 rounds of interviews, Sarah said slowly. How did we not see this? Because she's good at performing, Jonathan said. She knows what to say in interviews, how to present herself professionally, what buzzwords to use. But when she thought no one who mattered was watching, when she thought she was surrounded by people beneath her, her true character came out. So what do we do? asked the interim head of customer experience. First, we need to seriously examine our interview process, Jonathan said. We need to assess not just what candidates say, but who they really are. Maybe we need to include scenarios, observations of how they treat people they don't think are important. Like secret shopping, but for candidates, someone suggested. Something like that, Jonathan agreed. But more importantly, we need to be very clear about what our values actually mean in practice. We say we value people, but are we hiring and promoting people who actually demonstrate that value? Or are we hiring people who talk about valuing people while actually prioritizing metrics? The conversation continued for another hour, transforming from a post-interview debrief into a broader discussion about corporate culture, hiring practices, and the disconnect between stated values and actual behavior. The next day, Jonathan began his undercover work at the Customer Service Center in Queens, posing as John Hayes' new employee. He worked the phones, dealt with frustrated customers, navigated the complex computer systems, and experienced firsthand the pressures and challenges his employees faced. He discovered that many of the efficiency measures implemented over the past 2 years, shorter call times, stricter metrics, reduced training, had made it nearly impossible for customer service representatives to actually help customers. They were forced to rush people off the phone, to stick to scripts that didn't address actual problems, to prioritize quantity over quality. Over the course of the month, Jonathan worked in 5 different departments, always undercover, always learning. And every lesson reinforced what he had learned on that flight from San Francisco, that leadership required empathy, that culture mattered, that treating people well was not just ethical, but essential. The story of Vanessa Morrison's disastrous interview spread through Sterling Technologies, though the details were deliberately kept vague to protect her privacy. But the lesson was clear: Sterling character mattered as much as competence, and how you treated people when you thought no one important was watching revealed your true qualifications for leadership. 3 months after the flight, Jonathan was back in his CEO role, but changed by his undercover experience. He implemented new policies, increased training time for customer service reps, revised metrics that prioritize customer satisfaction over call volume, mandatory leadership training, focused on empathy and cultural values. He also instituted a new practice. Every executive, including himself, had to spend 1 week annually working in an entry-level position somewhere in the company. Not as themselves, but undercover, experiencing the reality of their own organization from the bottom up. Some executives resisted. "It's a waste of time," one VP complained. "We have actual work to do." "This is actual work," Jonathan replied. "The most important work. Understanding what our employees and customers actually experience, not what we think they experience based on reports and metrics." 6 months later, Sterling Technologies began climbing back up the customer satisfaction rankings. Employee engagement scores improved. Culture began to shift from efficiency-focused to people-focused. And Jonathan never forgot the lesson of seat 32B, that the person next to you in economy class might be anyone, might be someone whose judgment will define your future, might be someone whose respect you need. But more importantly, every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of who they are, what they wear or where they sit on an airplane. That was the lesson Vanessa Morrison never learned, and it cost her everything.